So good morning and welcome. Welcome to the Retired Living True series. My name is Reginald and I'm your host, along with my beautiful wife who's down the back and business partner and engineer. We're both the founders of the True series for anyone who is new. And we just thank you for all being here today for this somewhat more challenging topic for this year. So a couple of things I did want to talk about. Number one, can you all make sure you've silenced your cell phones or turned them off or put them on vibrate just so they're not ringing during this? Would be greatly appreciated. And then I just have a favour. Could everybody open up their binder? Everyone should have a binder. And hopefully at the very back you have a sleeve that contains business cards. And I'm just curious, in your sleeve, is there anyone in the room that has 24 business cards in their sleeve? Because we have 24 education partners. Does anyone have 24? Nope. Oh, one. Very good, a very diligent person. So I challenge everybody else on your way out to go past each of our education partners and at the minimum collect their business card. And if they have other information, I would suggest getting that as well. Can anyone tell me why that might be helpful at some point down the road? We're all aging. Yeah, we have some great resources here with our education partners, and it would behoove us to have their information. So if something happens to a friend, a loved one, ourselves, we have the information, we know who to call. And I know any of our education partners, if they don't have the answer, they'll go out of their way to find the right person for you to talk to. So take advantage of them and make sure you have their contact information just by making sure you have a business card in the back of the binder. Who's going to accept that challenge? Show of hands. Because I'm going to ask the same question next month as to who has all 24 cards. What's that, Beverly? A prize. That's a good idea. I'll think about a prize. Yes, I like that. So I have a question. Has anyone here worked out how to avoid death? We have one. I'll talk to you later. Yeah. So it's kind of inevitable, isn't it? It's part of the journey of life. At some point, whether we like it or not, we're all going to pass. Can we agree on that? Yep. There is no other alternative. We're all going to die. I'm going to die, each of us. But the reason for today's topic is to not only just acknowledge that, but maybe to have some tools and different ways to think about it and how to deal with end of life. So I'm just so happy that we have a full room, that you're all willing to be here today. One of our education partners, AARP, had some interesting statistics from a survey they did earlier this year. And one of the things from respondents was 83% of adults say they understand the end-of-life transition is an important part of life and have positive attitudes related to this transition. Well, obviously this room is better because we're 100%, because everybody is here. So well done. And then the second thing from their survey was just on 70% say the topic is generally avoided. People don't want to talk about death, do they? Most people don't want to, our kids, our loved ones, our siblings don't want to talk about it. So you are in the 30% who do, so congratulations for being willing to deal with this topic. And then 35% of people agreed with the statement, there is no reason to talk about dying. When you die, you die. That's pretty true. And there isn't anything you can do about it. Well, is that true? Nothing that we can do about it? We are going to die, but there are things we could do in advance of what's inevitable. So again, congratulations for being part of the 65% who are here today who feel differently. And so we have two great panelists, and I'm going to have them come up and join me. You might recall Melissa. She was on a panel a couple of months ago. Does anyone remember what that panel was? The truth about love, sex, and shacking up. Wasn't she fantastic? So super excited to have Melissa back again. And then joining me, many of you I'm sure have seen AJ before, who's also been on one of our past panels. So they're going to help us with this challenging topic. So thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. So maybe I could start with you, AJ. Could you begin just by introducing who you are and why you're here today?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. No?
Bryce, let's go again.
Can you hear me?
Nope.
No.
Is it on? Got a little light?
Oh, there, maybe. There.
Yes, there we go.
We have a winner. Good morning, everybody. My name is AJ Reed.
and I've been a nurse in our community for about 25 years, and I work for hospice. I've been helping to care for the community for about 14 years, and I'm really happy to be here and talking with you guys today.
Thank you. Melissa.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So nice to see you. I'm Melissa Chancel Harry. I run a business called Sacred Transits, and I work with people in the realms of sex, death, and Reiki. So I'm a sex and intimacy coach, which is why I was here in September. I'm a death doula, and I do Reiki, both for those who are transitioning. Reiki, I saw a face, so Reiki is an energetic, sort of like hands-on or hands-off way of connecting with someone's energy and offering a deep sense of healing. And I've actually found that it's incredibly helpful for bereavement, especially if you've lost someone, like one of your closest people. I find that Reiki is really helpful. It's a way of attending to the need without having to talk about and drudge up all of the things that maybe you experienced. So maybe that will come up later.
I'm sure. Thank you, Melissa. And I saw there was quite a few new faces here in the audience. The way this is going to work, which I should have explained, is for the first 55 minutes, I'm going to ask questions on behalf of you, the audience, to our panelists. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll open it up to any questions you have of our panelists. And then we'll have you out of here by 11:30 or sooner, depending on how many questions we have. So maybe if I could start with you, AJ. Why do people have such a hard time talking about death? Why might that be?
Scary.
It's scary.
No, I think some of the biggest reasons we don't talk about it, really, if you're going to put it in a nutshell, it's fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of having the conversation, fear of asking questions. I think we don't talk about it with our families as much because we're afraid of how they're going to respond to us. I've had many people say, I haven't been able to talk to my kids because they don't have the same belief system that I have. They may not agree with my decisions. And so it can be a really tough conversation to have when you feel strongly about certain things. I think other times people don't even know how to bring up the conversation and to start talking about it. When's a good time to tell my kids what I want my end of life to look like? Is there a good time? Is it at the Thanksgiving dinner table? Probably not. Probably not. But it can be difficult. Other times, people may not even know what they want or what options might be available to the end of life. I would say, 60 and 70 years ago, we counted on physicians to just tell us what things were going to look like. And I think over the years, we've pretty much empowered individuals to be an active participant in their health care. And you do have more options. So being able to talk about it with family is really, really important. But we got to get past that fear portion of it. We also have cultural aspects that may be a barrier to having the conversation. In some cultures, it's considered to be bad luck to have the conversation. In other cultures, it's very disrespectful. Those tend to be in more of like our Asian cultures, but they do exist. We also have our own bias and superstitions. If I talk about it, it may happen. So I think those are some of the biggest reasons people don't have the conversation. I really think a lot of it stems back to either fear or just not even knowing how to bring it up and have that talk.
Thank you. Melissa, what would you like to add?
Yeah, totally agree. Everything that was shared. Something that we know of some of the main fears around death are like fear of the process of the body. But one of the biggest ones is a fear of a life not fully lived. And I think we often avoid this because if we take the time to examine how do I feel about my life or what do I need at the end, like an exercise I do with people is to envision being at the end and what it would take for you to let go peacefully. And that often brings up harder questions like, oh, there are some important conversations I need to have. I wish I had taken more risks. Oh, I did some things that I should probably atone for, repair, mention, own. And so that can sometimes bring up things that are hard, but they're incredibly emotionally and spiritually rewarding. But sometimes I think that avoidance is a piece of the puzzle as well.
So is it too late for any of us to take more risks if we choose, or to atone or apologize or seek forgiveness?
It's never too late. Ever, ever, ever. So, and I think that's one of the reasons I do the work that I do, is because, it only takes a 1% shift, right? A 1% shift or change for something to change, and 1% plus 1% plus 1% means eventually over time something's different. And we never know how much time we have ahead of us. And so I think this work is really important on like a spiritual, cosmic, emotional level, that there's lots of little things we can do, whether it's being planful about what should happen to our bodies, what should happen to our personal belongings. But there is something in the work of being just emotionally prepared that it becomes far less scary. Something that I have found with clients is, as uncomfortable as the conversation may feel, like the idea of like, let's talk about death, let's talk about the end. You might feel yourself tense or pucker a little bit. And what I have noticed is that with the right kind of attention and care, it actually can be a really life-affirming and inspiring conversation.
Thank you. And if you have questions that come up, because we're kind of covering a whole lot of information, on your handout, there's a section there just to write down your questions. And I know Melissa and AJ will happily answer those when we get to the question portion of this. So yeah, don't hesitate to jot down your questions as we go along. So what's the downside of us not having these conversations now, just avoiding it altogether? Is there a downside? Melissa?
Yes. So I think the downside is a lot of unexpressed wishes, a lot of confusion for both yourself or your loved ones. So the way I like to talk about this is loving our people all the way through the end. And so it may feel awkward. I don't know the situations. Like sometimes you might have multiple siblings or multiple children that you need to share difficult information with, and that can feel hard. But I've seen families. One thing that I find is that people think they're going to react one way when they're confronted with a diagnosis, a prognosis, or the actual end of life. And then how people actually show up, being the person who's transitioning or their family members, is often very surprising. Sometimes people show up in ways and you think, wow, I didn't know they were that generous and that patient and that kind. And then other people, they just start grasping for things, sometimes out of fear and sometimes out of greed. And so having these conversations to be clear about what it is you want for your body and your belongings before there's an acute thing. So imagine a catastrophic event, a medical event, or a diagnosis. Everyone's in their feelings. Everyone's in a state where their nervous system is not in a balanced and centered place. And so then you're trying to make really important decisions on top of a lot of emotion. And I don't know about you, but not all of my best decisions have been made when I'm really scared, really worried, or really angry. So that's for me one of the most important things, is to do it in a preparatory sense and from a place of like inner knowing, and then it makes having the conversation outside of a moment of acute need.
But Melissa, I went and completed my advance directive. I sat with the attorney, asked all these questions and covered all the things that I wanted. Isn't that enough? The family have that? When things go south, they can read what my wishes were?
That can be a lot. Enough is up to each individual person. If you have zero feeling about what happens to your body or how the people around you are effective, that might be enough for you. Some interesting questions that have come up that I have noticed. So at the end of someone transitioning, they're at home. So I had a client in August. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he was at home on hospice, and his family was with him, and we were just sitting and being present with him. And it was a stepmom and 2 biological children. So it was his children and his wife. And what was interesting was I said, what is the plan for what happens when he passes? And they sort of looked at me like, I don't know. I was like, okay, just want to question, because at that point then the wife said, oh, well, I'd really love to take a lock of his hair. And then I saw that idea land with one of the children. And it was just this feeling where it's like that was her way of honoring it, but one of the children was not sure that they were comfortable with that. So just having a conversation around what does the immediate time look like here? And this is just one example. There are so many questions and things to talk about leading up to death, in active death, and beyond. But it was this really helpful conversation where it was like, we want to sit with the body for a few hours, and we know who we need to call. Because sometimes you'll go to call someone and they might come in 45 minutes and no one's actually ready for the body to leave. No one's had a moment to just settle and sit with and accept the death that has just occurred, the loss that has happened. And our culture's not great about giving us a lot of time. I don't know what your experience is, but time and space are not things we value, right? Not unless they are worth something, monetarily usually in our culture. So just the importance of saying, what will we do to care for this body? And then when someone dies, the rituals that we hold, who are they for? Are they for the person transitioning, or are they for the family that's left behind? It's just a really important philosophical question. And when you can come together and have that question, because it will also help your children, your spouse, your family come to terms with your death, and then hopefully have a more peaceful experience of what the bereavement period might be like. Because grief can get really complicated and really painful and interrupt the experience interrupt the rest of their lived experience.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, AJ?
The only thing that I'd say is, echoing Melissa talking about family members, is when we don't know what our family wants. For instance, I've had a very in-depth conversation with my parents. In the event that something happens, I'm fully aware of what they want done, and not done, for a better term. People have to make really hard decisions if they haven't had the conversation. If something unexpected happens, your family tends to carry the burden of making decisions on what you would or would not have done. At the end of the day, if we're going to pass, we're going to pass. We're at peace, right? We're not here anymore. But we leave a lasting memory with our family, and making decisions that haven't been discussed can leave an emotional toll on our family members. Is this what my mom would have wanted done? Would she have chosen something different? Did I make the wrong decision? So at least having the conversation even puts your family at ease. They're the ones left behind with the emotional toll of what's transpired. Advance directives are great. We help guide families all the time. Your loved one felt so strongly about these particular topics that they had it put in writing, they had it notarized, they had a lawyer go over it. This was extremely important to them. It is very hard to guide families when we as medical practitioners don't know what the person's wishes were, because how do we best guide somebody that we don't even know? It can be really tough.
So that might be easier on me, having a conversation with my mum as to what does that really mean, no more food, water, or whatever it might be in there, so I understand what she really means by that.
Absolutely, and some of us have really strong opinions on what we're okay with. Some people have strong opinions on feeding tubes and CPR and breathing tubes. Other people don't. It is okay to say, I don't really know what I want because I can't think of all the scenarios in my head, but let me go over some of the broad strokes with my family in the event that something like that happens, because at least that helps guide them in some of the decisions.
Thank you. So part of our topic today was dying with dignity. So I just wanted to ask you, what does that mean to each of you? What does it mean to die with dignity? Let's start with you, AJ.
I think one of the most common things I hear is, I want to go out with my boots on. Who's heard this term? What does that mean? You want to go out with your boots on. That means something very different to everybody. I think death with dignity is meeting every individual where they're at and making their goals happen. Sometimes people have goals of, I can handle a little more pain to be awake and alert and talking with my family members. And other people say, I don't want to be cognizant of anything. Make me comfortable. I'm going to say my goodbyes. I love you guys. But goals are different. So going out with your boots on can look very, very different from every individual. And I think death with dignity is asking the questions. What do you want the next 6 months to look like? What do you want the next 30 days to look like? What are your biggest goals? Is it pain management? Is it making it to a date or an anniversary? How can we meet your needs? And I think that's what death with dignity is.
So we're talking about like a chronic illness or a terminal illness as opposed to massive heart attack and I'm just gone or passing away in my sleep. This is where I know the end is coming versus...
Typically.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we live longer now, because doctors do an amazing job and we have 1 million different medications to help us, we're seeing longer lifespans. And with that longer lifespan, usually comes the opportunity of time, and then knowing when our time might be coming to an end and helping to prepare for that. Acute injuries, there's not a whole lot we can do to prepare, it just happens. But that longer term is what we're looking at usually.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yeah, and I think even in those acute terms, when we can't control those, but that's why the conversations are so important, right? because of the medical advances that we have, we can get ourselves in these positions where, oh, I didn't realize we could even reach this position where technically they're alive, but they're not speaking and they may not wake up again. And now myself and my brother are in complete disagreement about what we should do for the next 3 months. So having that guidance is why it's super important. And why when we talk about death with dignity, I really think there are sort of two different limbs to this tree. One is meeting the client where they're at. And so I think sometimes, if you're not sure what a death doula does, death doulas do a lot of different things, but that's our first thing is to meet the client where they're at, and we work for who hired us. So sometimes I'm hired by the person transitioning, and sometimes I'm hired by the family member supporting the person transitioning. And so the goal is to honor whatever the person. So I work for whoever hired me, and at the end of the day, usually the focal point is our person transitioning, and we try to meet them with what their goals are, what they want, and honor their wishes. And I have to host a lot of delicate conversations when sometimes there's a difference in opinion or feeling or desire. So for me, death with dignity is meeting the person where they're at and holding space for what's true for them. There's another realm of death with dignity, which is often the phrase that's used when we talk about choices, choice and autonomy at the end of life. And so it was the death with dignity movement for a while, which is also how we, the other terms we would know this by are assisted suicide, which is no longer really the term that we are using. It's not, just hearing the words, it doesn't feel good. And it brings up a lot of polarizing feelings among people. So it's moved now in legislation, it's referred to as medical aid in dying. And so the concept of dying with dignity is, should you have a terminal illness or bleak prognosis, that you get to play an active role in choosing what happens with yourself, your body, and your choices at the end. So this is really important in the realm of Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy body, and the things that have cognitive decline and physical decline, ALS, Parkinson's, this kind of thing. A lot of things happen to the body, and the body will still be here while maybe the mind is not there, or the capability and the very painful journey that a soul has to go through when they experience that diagnosis. So medical aid in dying, it is not legal in Nevada right now. There was a bill at this legislature, so at the state leg in 2021, they tried to get one through, didn't get very far. 2023, widespread public support. It passed the Assembly and the Senate, but Governor Lombardo vetoed it. So we do not have medical aid in dying in Nevada. There was widespread support. There were 4 major things that was like, you have to have a terminal diagnosis and be under the care of a physician. You have to be of sound mind, meaning like you have to be able to make this request. So you had to make the request twice verbally and then once written, each with 15 days in between. So they wanted to pace it out, which is a completely reasonable thing. And then a lot of things with medical aid in dying is that you have to be able to administer the medicine to yourself. So to my knowledge right now in the states, you can either go to Oregon or Vermont, and I think Washington State is very close. I'll have to check, but Vermont and Oregon are states where you can go to actually request and have medical aid in dying, but there are residency requirements. So it's another reason this conversation that we're having is so important, is that these things take time. So sometimes you can't just say, I want to die in Oregon, so I'm going to move to Oregon next week, and it's fine, I'll get the meds in 2 weeks, and it's fine. That's not how it works. Even when it comes to other choices you have as far as taking care of your body afterwards, if you are someone who's interested in terramation, and this is for later in the conversation, but that's like composting or returning back to soil, those things are not available in every state. And if these are choices you want for your body, there's paperwork, bureaucracy, and planning that has to go into it. So I just wanted to make the distinction, like, everyone deserves to die with dignity, in my opinion. And there are 2 ways that we talk about it. It's really just you meeting you as the human, but there's also this other movement around body autonomy and medical care at the end and having a choice to exit earlier, right, than maybe your natural body would decline into exit.
Thank you, Melissa. So I actually put up a slide, medical aid in dying in the states and the countries. AJ, you'd kindly provided that list to me. Did you want to add to that?
The only other thing is different states also require 1 to 2 physicians agreeing that you have a terminal illness. So again, if you were going to move to another state, you have to establish with a physician to be able to meet those needs.
And when I put the slide together, I actually looked up each of the different states, and the rules are so different for everyone. It's like some are like partially helpful, some are really helpful. Yeah, so you really need to research each state if that was something that's of interest. Anything on countries you wanted to mention?
I want to move to one.
You want to move to one? Yeah. I'm just looking at the list. I can see them on the screen, but I don't see Australia on there, but Switzerland is. So, yeah, New Zealand. New Zealand's close. Okay. So how do we go about having these difficult conversations with family and loved ones? Where do we begin? We talked about it being important. How do we bring up the subject? You said probably Thanksgiving's not the time.
Maybe
not. Maybe not Thanksgiving.
How would you go about it?
You know, it's hard and it's different for every family. You know your family best. I think if you have an open family where you can have conversations. I've been a nurse for a lot of years. There's nothing taboo and off the table for our family to have a conversation about. We have conversations very easily. I'm happy to bring up hard conversations. It's part of my family, but it's not part of every family. So if you have difficult family members, sometimes you need to do it in bite-sized pieces. Sometimes you're not going to be able to get the whole enchilada done at once. So, for some families, it's starting to have the conversation. I think the thing that can be tough with families is as a culture, we deflect really well on conversations we don't want to talk about. And so I hear from a lot of families, I tried to talk to my son about what I want or what to expect. And my son said, I don't want to talk about it right now. We've got plenty of time. Don't be morbid. We don't need to go there. But we deflect as a culture because as a culture, we really haven't embraced talking about the end of life. So how are we going to do that? Break it down. Hey, next week, I'd like you to come over to the house. I'd like to have a conversation about my advance directives. I'd like you to come over so that we can talk about my wishes on do not resuscitate or whether or not I should have CPR. As we get older, there are things that happen. I will be the first to say the earlier is better. I had a massive stroke at 24 years old. I lost my speech. I was paralyzed, and my husband of 27-year-old had to make decisions. And he panicked. The first thing he did was to call my mom. I'm my mom's only child. She will do anything and everything. Is that my wishes? Probably not. Was I ready to have the conversation at 24? Nope. When I got my speech back, guess what we talked about? But it's important because we don't know. I'm high risk for having another stroke. I'm genetically predisposed to it. Everybody in my family has had one, so it's important for us to have the conversations. So sometimes you've got to break it down in smaller pieces because, again, like we talked about, our lifespans are increasing. We are living longer with chronic illnesses. Is there something that could happen? Anytime. Anytime. So what would we want done? Break those down into bite-sized pieces. Find a good place that you can have a conversation. Maybe you have a family member who's your only family member and they're not the easiest to talk to. Maybe having a third-party intermediary there, whether it be a family friend that has thoughts and decisions that you have to kind of help buffer. Sometimes it's, hey, we're going to the lawyer. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to fill these things out. Another thing, I recommend is 5 wishes. I brought a fair amount. I brought some. I will order more and bring them for every session we have. But 5 Wishes is a very nice booklet that goes through systematically and talks about wishes. Would I want feeding tubes? Would I want a breathing machine, a ventilator? Would I like hydration even if I have a terminal illness? So it kind of goes down, and maybe you start slowly filling this out and meeting with your family and talking about 1 page in the 5 Wishes. Other family members, again, you can have the whole conversation. Maybe you need to go to a lawyer, but a lot of times it's little pieces at a time. I recommend making a checklist of all the things that are in 5 wishes, and then you check off a box when you've had the conversation with your family. So, one of my recommendations.
Melissa?
Yeah, I love to talk about it as needs, wants, desires. So if you're not sure, so 5 Wishes is great. There's several books out there. I'm Dead, Now What is a really irreverent one. So if you have a sense of humor and that helps you, like, I really want to invite everyone to approach it in a way that really works for your nervous system. Like for some people, it's a deeply spiritual, religious thing. There are plenty of texts like death planners, end-of-life planners that have that vibe. You can go with something irreverent and funny if that helps you or helps your family. If you're not interested in getting a binder or a folder or a guide, needs, wants, desires. And it's just sort of starting with what are my needs, because that's a thing that that needs to be communicated and it's more definitive. Here are my needs and I need to share that with people. Here are my wants or hopes and wishes, and this is more of a conversation with others. And so I think AJ's point of breaking it down, that's one way to break it down. And what is it that you need to inform, and what is it you need to converse or decide things about? So this is a thing that I also help people do. So like death doulas or others, so AJ's right, family, someone who's like-minded. Maybe you have one family member who's really good at holding a boundary and kindly and compassionately saying things that are difficult, or keeping people on track, because I've found that people will get together to have this conversation, and then lo and behold, we are talking about the next family meal or this person's birthday party, and the thing we didn't talk about was the one thing we gathered about. So it is helpful to have one person who's sort of like, here's our goal. I like to ask people to move at the speed of trust and to only go as fast as the slowest part of them. And when we take that approach, we know that we're going to need time. We really don't want to rush this. And so sometimes it's just getting clear about what it is you need and want, and then that will help frame up what it is you need to communicate. And practice the conversation. It's not weird to role play this, or just practice saying some of the things. And when you get there in the actual moment, breathe. Just take a deep breath. It's the only way to be in the moment. You can't breathe in the past, and we can't breathe in the future. But if you take a deep breath, you'll be here right now.
I'm just curious, for those who are willing to share, and you don't have to, but just show of hands, who has an advanced healthcare directive of some sort? So most people. Keep your hand up if you've looked at it in the last 5 years to see what you checked the box. Well, really good. And now keep your hand up if you've had a conversation with whoever the person would be that would be honouring those decisions if something happened. Oh wow, a lot of people have had the conversations. I'm impressed.
Job,
good job,
everyone.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Wonderful. So for you, AJ, can you help us understand end of life? We hear 2 terms, palliative care, hospice care. What are they exactly for those who aren't familiar? And what's the difference between the two? And when would I maybe choose one over the other?
Great question. All hospice is palliative care. Palliative means comfort. So hospice is a form of palliative care, but palliative care in its truest form is something a little different. Sometimes we don't like using the word hospice, and so we're developing some new words. We've created a team called a palliative care team. And a palliative care team is primarily a consultative service. So it is people, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians that are well educated in all disease processes. And palliative care may be brought up when somebody has a potentially life-limiting illness but is still seeking aggressive treatment. I think everybody understands cancer. Sometimes palliative care is going to come in when somebody's in the hospital and they've had a traumatic incident, and we're trying to establish where do we go from here. So palliative care team will come in and do disease process education, review treatment options, establish personal goals, talk about what to expect as time goes on. But I think the easiest way to understand palliative care is the bridge between aggressive treatment, I'm on a path, I don't need any help, I know what my goals are, and I know what the treatment plan is, and then transitioning potentially to hospice. Palliative care sits right in that middle stage. We use it more frequently with individuals that have a chronic illness. As your chronic illness progresses, here's what to expect. Here are the treatment options that are available to you now. Here are the things that are going to be available to you down the road. Some palliative care teams can even write for pain medicine, anti-anxiety medicine, and palliative care can help with symptom management. Again, it's a consultative service. It's another layer of care to help individuals understand what's going on with them and what to expect, and then kind of figure out where you want to go from here. Sometimes people are in the hospital, they had COPD, the COPD's getting worse. Hey, you're on a lot of oxygen. What do we do next? Would you want to be intubated? If you don't want to be intubated, here are the treatment options that we can do to help you. Other times it's, hey, your disease process has gotten to kind of the end. Do you want to continue going in and out of the hospital to try to get the aggressive treatments that may or may not be helping you? Or are you ready to transition to some services at home that provide hands-on care? And that's what hospice does. Hospice does the hands-on care outside of the hospital typically when someone has decided that they either no longer want to seek aggressive treatment or they've gone the gamut of all the treatment options and now it's like, we don't have anywhere else to go. But that's what palliative care does. Does that help? Does that make sense? Okay, good.
So can I just ask then, am I correct to assume it's non-curative? If I've got cancer and I'm getting chemo treatment and I have the expectation I'm going to get through this, that wouldn't be palliative care. Palliative care would be that I've now finished chemo, I'm terminal, I'm stage 4, we all believe there is no cure for me, but I still want to live as long as I possibly can. Is that palliative care?
Palliative care can, because some people just don't want hospice. Some people are like, I'm going out with my boots on. I'm going to do everything. Palliative care can also be in an acute situation. Maybe somebody has had a heart attack and they're not able to speak for themselves, and you have advanced directives, but family's like, I don't know if they really wanted that. We haven't talked about it in 5 years. Palliative care can help shed some light on decision making. So palliative care can come in an acute situation to establish goals of care and to help guide a family. But palliative care can also be there for the marathon of treatment and options before somebody's looking at the hospice perspective.
Thank you. So just to expand on that a little bit more, Melissa, so for someone who is terminally ill, what factors should we be considering, or they should be considering, regarding aggressive treatment, palliative care, or hospice care? And obviously it's different for everybody, but what are some of the things that we should be thinking about in trying to make a decision?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things to think about, and part of it is really being clear with your own moral compass, right? So we've sort of mentioned it loosely or referred to it, but you have sort of your health span and then your lifespan. So life is how long you're alive, but your health span is what is the quality of my life while I'm alive? And it's this answer, there's no magic equation, and it matters, it's unique to each individual. And so from my perspective, it's making sure you have a thorough care team, which is why hospice is so important. You have pieces of a care team. There's spiritual care, there's a social worker who's present, you have a nurse that comes. AJ will probably talk more about that. But on top of that, it's what is the full wraparound services that I need, and what is the quality of life? And then what are the changes and adjustments I have the ability to make? An interesting thing about death is it brings in privilege, right? If we are resourced and have the money and the space and the time, that's one type of death that we can have. If our resources are limited in any way, that affects some of the choices that might be available to us. So it's about taking stock of, what is the support system I have? What's available? Can I alter? I just had a client actually where she, as the wife, they're a married couple, they're in their 80s, She came very, very close to transitioning and then came back, was this side of the veil again, which was great. But we needed to have the conversation about like what does going home look like, because we need to address like who's doing the cooking, and are there ways to shift like how we're living in the home to accommodate where you are at this stage. So for me, it's the moral compass of like, what does my quality of life, what's the best quality of life for me right now, and what will best support me taking steps in a peaceful and easeful way.
The only thing I really add to that, I did oncology nursing for about 8 years. I think when we talk about quality of life too, or treatment options or decisions, it is how are you going to wrap your head around things? I think one of the things that I see towards the end of life, for me that's truly heartbreaking, is regret and the what ifs. And I think when we're making decisions about our health care, quality of life is the most important. You know, do I have quality of life now? Am I going to have quality of life if I make this treatment option? Is that going to meet my goal? And when our time comes, are you going to look back and say, what if? What if I would have tried that one treatment option? What would have happened if I would have tried chemotherapy? The regrets at end of life are the hardest things. Those are things that I can't take away from my patients. Can I help get family members on board? Sometimes. It is the Wild West. Once in a while, it's tough. But again, when I'm helping to counsel individuals on where do we go from here and what decisions we make, I have to ask the individual, what's important to you? What do you want time to look like? Sometimes people want to get to an anniversary or a graduation or a birth of a grandchild. How can we support you medically to meet that goal? So those are all things that play into the decisions that we make at treatment options. And I think being able to speak with somebody outside of the situation to really drill down on what's important to you guys as individuals is the best advice I can give.
Thank you, AJ.
And I just thought of one thing, so sorry. One of the questions that I find really important, that you're never too young to like journal, it's never too late and you're never too young to just note this for yourself, but do you have anything left unsaid? Sometimes that's the type of business that like, is there anything I need to emotionally wrap up, sort of clean up my side of the street, regardless of where my health is now in 3 months, in 3 years? So I think that's a really important question also at the end, is there anything else left unsaid?
Maybe you should be thinking about that now too.
Yeah, it's never. I think it's a helpful thing to think about all the time. I make better decisions when I think about that question.
Yeah, thank you. And then Melissa, you wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of spiritual and existential care during the process of end of life.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised Catholic, so the experience of someone dying and seeing like my first funeral, the first casket, the first dead body, I was pretty young, and it had a lot of ceremony and ritual and the smell of copal, which is the like incense that was burned in my church. It left like a real mark on me, and it meant a lot to me. And sometimes I also have observed that we're very death, and depending on your spiritual or religious tradition, it may not cover all of the things that you find valuable. And so I do the work that I do because I really believe that we can experience the death of others in a different way, right? Like we can't experience loss without having that incredible amount of love, right? We can't experience or know how beautiful or magical life is without its absence. And so in holding that balance and that paradox, I really like to invite people to like, this is an entire experience. And some people want to be wildly alive all the way up until the end. There's a movie called The Last Ecstatic Dance, which follows a young man with glioblastoma. And he chooses to be like ecstatically alive all the way up to the end. And it's incredibly inspiring. And there's just a sense of sacredness and space that you can set in your home, in a hospital room, in a skilled nursing facility. So depending on what you or your family are experiencing, we can bring an energy and a sense of space and spirituality to that. And it's about matching what works for the person and what's meaningful to the person, and then the person's loved ones. Like I have seen people just want to read poetry or like be energetically connected to them. So maybe just standing by their bedside and holding space, lighting candles, bringing things that come to mind when we think of that person. So there's often at the end what is sometimes called like the rally, or there'll be this like if someone's sort of in active death, which is typically the last hours, days, and they're just the circulation is draining out of their extremities, the breathing is changing, sometimes it's kind of loud and it can be a little off-putting, but they're clearly transitioning. But sometimes they'll get this like rush of energy, and it might seem like they're recovering. But they also sometimes think they're going somewhere. And so what I really love to do is invite people to help them pack their bag. And I find this to be a really soothing and like emotionally meaningful thing for the family members to do, but you help them pack their bag. And so in one case, I had a man who loved to be outside, so they packed his bag with his water bottle, his favorite pocket knife, we lit some candles, but they participated in packing his bag, and it was just this really, like, it was a magical moment that, like, we're incredibly lucky to be with someone when they cross the threshold. That is an incredibly sacred and beautiful space. And it's a miracle that we even get to see or be present with someone on both sides. So when they're coming in and when they're going out. But to pack the bag, and then there's something about that practice that also allows the family who's seeing them over the threshold to let them go. And so there is an energy that we can bring to this. And so sometimes your pastor, your priest, your faith leader can add to that, but you can also add to that. And this is part of the conversation I have with people. That's like, what does a good death look like? What would you want for yourself? I want for myself to be surrounded by flowers. I love flowers. I want there to be certain music on. I want there to be good food for anyone who comes by. And as a death doula, I want anyone who's afraid of a dying body to come be near me, even if they don't know me. That's a thing that I truly want. I don't know if that's going to happen. I might go in my sleep. I might go in an accident. Like, I don't know. But I have a belief of spiritually what would feel like a balm to me. And then I try to talk about it with other people. So I think there is a real sense of like life that we can bring to the end.
Thank you. Amanda, anything in your experiences you wanted to share with the audience in terms of examples, end of life, spiritual?
I agree with everything Melissa said. Addressing spiritualism at the end of life is just as important as addressing the medical things that we manage, symptom management. Most people think about hospice as the nurses come in and they give pain medicine and they'll make sure my loved one isn't struggling. And we do all the things medically. Absolutely, that's correct. But one of the conditions of participation for hospice is we are required to provide spiritual care. Because no matter how you look at it, end of life, we're trying to separate from this world. And a big part of that is spiritualism. And for some people that means believing in God. Some people mean connecting with nature. We care for individuals that are Buddhist. But one of the most important facets of end-of-life care is addressing all the components to end of life, which is spiritualism. And if you don't address it, and it is a very important part to an individual, you can see someone prolong until some of these issues have been addressed. With our mind, it's a systematic of checking the boxes to leave this world. And if you leave a box unchecked, it can keep somebody with us because it's causing a deep-rooted issue. And that's awful. So spiritualism is very important to address, making sure that they have that support. It's just as important. At end of life, one of the most common things that we see in my 14 years of being a hospice nurse, about 90% of my patients see somebody that has passed before them, come get them. If you don't have a grasp of spiritualism, that can be really scary. There are family members that are trying to tell the person that's experiencing that they're not there. Some families have said, oh, it's a demon. I don't believe any of that. I can't think of anything more comforting than seeing somebody I know and love taking me out of this world. That's a precious gift. And so if we can help address some of the spiritualism portions of that and help families understand, people can have a very, very beautiful, dignified, graceful passing.
Thank you for sharing that. So just changing topics a little bit, what legal and financial things should we be looking at to put in place to ensure that our wishes are honoured at end of life? I guess we touched on it a little bit, but just to...
There's a lot. There's advanced directives, living wills, durable power of attorney, DNR or a post that addresses our code status. Are we going to have everything done? Are we going to have nothing done? Those are the big ones. Did I miss anything, Melissa?
No, those are the big ones. But here's the thing, one of the other fears about death is our lack of control. And so this is a really interesting exercise of being in paradox and holding multiple truths. Because you can do all of this work and prepare everything, and then there are still things that can go differently than you plan or than you want. And so it's a delicate balance of how do I put into place things that will most likely result in the thing that I hope, best case scenario, and also knowing that I may not get exactly what I want. So these forms are really important. And AJ sort of mentioned it, where it's like there's an advanced directive, it's 5 years old, and you think, this is a piece of paper that says exactly what I want, this will happen. Not all the time. If they feel like they haven't had the conversation, and then you have your medical power of attorney there who's then saying other things, like it can shift. So it is helpful to have the right legal support to review your paperwork and make sure that your estate planning and your other planning is like accurate to your current wishes. So I recommend once you should look at them annually. It should just be like a matter of business at the top of the year. Does this look good? Great. There was one thing I was going to say and I don't remember now. But yeah, so just know that we can do all the work that we can to organize it, and we have to hold that we won't really be able to control every single thing all the way through the end. It's a delicate balance.
Is there anything we can do to avoid conflicts, perhaps with family members who are left behind, or during that time as someone's passing, to avoid conflict that'll come up? I'm really sure Mum wanted this, and siblings going, no, Mum wouldn't want that.
I mean, this is where just communication and documentation are super important. And that starts with you knowing what's true for you and what you need. I don't know that there's any way to avoid arguments or disagreements, but when you have a plan, so some death doulas, we do things like, especially for people who have a lot of meaningful personal items or belongings, we help design different systems for giving out. Like, let's say you have 18 grandchildren and you have 2 homes, you have a vacation home and a personal home. There are whole systems to randomize or create a lottery, so that then it's just, here's the sequence you're going to go in. Everyone's going to go through and pick out their stuff. This can be delineated in your will. You can have a lawyer oversee it, but you can also do other things that sort of indicate what you want with your wishes. So for me, it's communication. It's thoughtful planning, communication, and documentation are the places to start. And then good luck. So something like you mentioned, CPR or DNR, do not resuscitate. Like if I'm there with the person who I'm now responsible for because they've appointed me, how am I meant to know, well, what do they really want? Is it CPR or DNR because it depended on the situation? Am I going to be able to tell that from the document, or is that really a conversation I need to have like with Annette as to what does that really mean?
Most of our documents cover CPR, DNR, because that's one of the biggest things that comes up. Again, having the conversation with families. I've worked in the hospital for a fair amount of time. Have we had situations where an advanced directive said one thing and the family member was wholeheartedly against it? It's not fun. Pick your power of attorney wisely. You want to have somebody that's going to carry out your decisions. There are great medical boards in the hospital when this type of conflict comes up. There's an ethics committee in a hospital who can meet and kind of go through the family's perspective and an individual's DNR and to help guide family. Palliative care can step in to help guide family on what an individual's wishes are. I think because advanced directives have finally become more popular and people are making their own decisions, we're doing a better job of honoring people's wishes and guiding family down the path that each of you set forth. But it is important to have that conversation.
Okay. So my last question before we move to audience questions, we'll start with you, Melissa. If you could wave a magic wand and can compel our audience to take one action to do one thing that would make the end-of-life process for themselves or their family easier, what might that be?
I think I'd really want everyone to just sort of sit with themselves and a journal and just say, like, what does a good death look like? And then from a place of like deep knowing, just do their best to work backwards towards that thing. It's just sitting with it. It's so uncomfortable. And so that's my hope for everyone. It's like, what can I sit with, and how can I sit with this truth that this is coming? Because I just think when we're thoughtful and when we know what's true for us, we just end up making better, more compassionate decisions.
Thank you. AJ?
I agree with all of that. I think it's important to either have the conversation or to get your thoughts and feelings down in writing. A month ago, I had the opportunity to take care of my best friend's mom, and she had Parkinson's disease. And with her Parkinson's, she was developing dementia. And once a week, we made a video. We made a video about what was important to her that day. We made a video for her nephew that was growing up. We made videos about the birds and what she saw that was beautiful that day. She had had an argument with her son, and she made a video the next week and was like, you know, you're kind of a jerk. I love you, but you're a jerk. And I want you to play this video and think back at the conversation that we've had. But she had the beautiful opportunity to record the last 3 months of what was the most important to her. And when she had a thought, we made a video, and we did it on the phone. I still get the opportunity to watch those videos because she was able to tell people how much she loved them. But her last 3 months were 100% recorded on anything and everything that was important to her. She recorded a video about her funeral service and what music to play. And don't invite that crazy aunt because she's going to say something stupid on a eulogy. Don't do it. You know, so she had amazing antidotes that she had time to provide. So if I can impart anything, have the conversation, know your wishes, document it, and maybe live a living legacy for your family, because we have all these great abilities to record things now.
Yeah, what a great gift for those left behind to be able to, yeah.
There's a saying that how we die sets the table for how our loved ones will go. And I find that is to be like really inspiring. It's like a way of showing them how you die is going to show the people you're leaving behind how they can die as well.
Thank you. So Nikki's going to take my right-hand side of the room, or the left side looking forward, and Sandy's going to take the left. If you have a question, raise your hand. If we could just begin by keeping it to questions only, not comments, so just a specific question of our panellists, we'd appreciate that. And then if we have time later and people have comments, then we can do comments, but if we can keep it to questions. So if we can just raise our hands, and thank you. Oh, first question over here.
I'd like you to discuss the role of hydration at the end. I have a very dry mouth ordinarily, and I wake up and I'm uncomfortable. But I understand giving water at the end can prolong the whole passing. Talk to me about it.
Okay, it's a loaded question. So there's a lot. I think hydration is really important dependent on where somebody is in their life cycle. We get acutely ill and we go into the hospital. We usually get an IV started and we get medication through that. Again, it depends on where are we at. If we're specifically talking at end of life, I would say hydration plays a role dependent upon your personal goals. Dry mouth, huge problem. There's artificial saliva that we can provide that can go in the mouth. We swab the mouth to keep the oral mucosa nice and moist. Hydration can 100% keep us going longer. So our bodies do okay without food. We have a period of time that our bodies can deal with no food. But without hydration and water, we go downhill pretty quickly. So if someone's goal is to not prolong their end of life, I would advise against hydration. We'll do all the things for comfort, moistening the mouth, artificial salivas. There's certain medications that we can avoid that cause dry mouth. We can use other medications in place of that to promote comfort. But again, if we're looking at end of life and an individual's goal is to not prolong, hydration will keep that body going a little bit longer. Does that help? Okay.
Definitely helps. Thank you for explaining that.
Thank you. I know you're not all lawyers, and the question I have has to do with medical aid in dying, or how does that affect life insurance?
Interesting question for our non-lawyers on stage.
And you're right. I'm a pretty good nurse. I'm a terrible lawyer. We've got some good lawyers here. I would investigate your policy, because there are some policies that might advise against it. The other thing is, I think what I would look at is if the state recognizes it and your insurance is from that state, you're probably okay. But again, you would want to investigate that policy, and if all else fails, making a phone call to that insurance company or seeking legal counsel would be my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. Death is very different in different states, so you absolutely need to look at all the fine print, all your paperwork. Something that I didn't mention, so here's the thing, medical aid in dying, if it does affect your life insurance policy, or if you're in a state that doesn't have the care available that you would hope for, there are other options. So it's called VSED. It's called voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It needs to be done under the care of a physician, but this approach is legal in all 50 states. And so I have had a client who chose this because of the nature of their situation. They chose to go the route of VSED.
One more time, Melissa, sorry to interrupt.
Voluntary,
V-S-E-D.
V-S as in Sam, E, well, V as in voluntarily, S as in stopping, E, eating, and drinking, D, drinking. So it's to choose to stop eating and drinking. It is recommended only for people who have like terminal and like end stage prognosis, but it is a choice that one can make to stop eating and drinking, and you do need the support of a medical professional just to guide you through the phases, because there becomes a point, much like AJ said, once you introduce any hydration, it can prolong the process. And sometimes, depending on where someone is and the delirium that can sometimes set in, they can actually ask for water or food, and then the caretaker has to be in a very clear, sound space about what they're doing. It's not necessarily the easiest path, but in a path where you don't have access or have other reasons that prevent you from making other choices, there is an option. And I think that's another thing that both hospice and death doulas provide, is our job is to just tell you all of the options that are available. And that's another, I think, facet of meeting people and allowing them to die with dignity, is to say, here's all the information. Here are the different ways you can treat your body. Here are the different ways you can be buried. Here are the different ways to honor. And then you make the choices that best suit you.
Thank you. A question over here.
Monet has a question. Is there a legal way to allow my husband to die on his own terms? He has late stages of dementia. And maybe before you guys start, I'll just tell you that my mom's living with dementia. So I'm going to give you my number and tell you everything not to do, okay?
He cannot request anything for himself.
I hear you, and that sounds so painful. I understand how painful that is. And sometimes when we don't have the information we need to make good decisions, we find ourselves in these really difficult and trying situations. So the thing is that even with VSED under the care of a medical professional, they would want to know that they had talked about that, right? So there becomes an ethics code of what care needs to be provided given that someone cannot advocate for themselves. And I think AJ might be able to speak more on that, or I don't know if hospice has a perspective on that. But I think you're in a really tough situation. You're in a very tough situation, and I see you. And I think having the support that you need, to voluntarily stop eating and drinking, that is something that person has to elect to do. So I don't know that I don't know what your options are, because I don't know the total situation of your particular care team, but you can only do the best you can with what you've got And I really feel for you, and thank you for sharing that with us.
To that, I'll just add, when you love somebody, you're making the best decisions that you can make for an individual out of love, and I would never hold any of those decisions against anybody when they're doing it out of love. And so I think you make the best decisions that you can as different situations present themselves. I recommend reaching out to primary care physicians to get some guidance. There are some great medical counselors out there that can provide guidance. So can a social worker from either home health, hospice, or at the hospital. And I think when you seek all of the information regarding each situation as it comes up and making decisions from your heart, you can't go wrong. I'm so sorry.
Can I just ask a question to follow up? Because maybe there's other people thinking it. Obviously, it's too late in this situation to do something, but I personally don't want to end up in that situation. So is there anything I can go and put in place now that if I'm no longer mentally competent, I want it to be known that whether it's VSET or something else, is there something I could do today? Could I go out so I'm never in that situation? So Annette's not in that position?
I think, again, having the conversation, picking a power of attorney, and creating a living will or advanced directives that signify each one of your wishes is the most helpful.
Yeah, your medical power of attorney is the person you deem who will make the decision specific to your health. So having that person delineated, having that person understand what you do and don't want for your body, and then having one or two backups, because sometimes people that we choose also transition or die. And so just having sort of a succession of people available who understand your wishes and having it, again, documented.
Yeah, so obviously you can't give legal advice, but if it's not already in my advance directive, I could go back to my attorney and say, I want this verbiage added so that the person who's making the decision is empowered to be able to talk to the doctor that this is what Brett wanted. Yeah, thank you. Question over this side.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the amazing information. I have had more experience in this than I ever wanted to but I want to know in the state of Nevada, because in other states you must get your primary doctor to sign you over to hospice. And I'm wondering, is that the situation in the state of Nevada?
Agent?
So we do have to have a physician's order, a doctor's order to provide hospice care. We've had a couple of situations come up where we have had individuals that haven't seen a doctor for 30 years. That should not preclude them from receiving end-of-life care. So we do have medical directors that can sign on as a primary care doctor and write the order so somebody can go into hospice. My personal preference from a business standpoint is I don't like to cut out primary care doctors or specialty doctors. So if somebody's seen a cardiologist for a long period of time or an oncologist, I don't want to cut them out of their patient care. We will always make the best efforts to get a doctor's order from the physicians that have been providing care to an individual. But in the event that they are not responsive, I haven't seen them in a long time, I'm not going to write an order unless they come in and see me, then our physicians can write the order because, again, nobody should be denied end-of-life care, ever.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who has questions? Because we've got like 13 minutes left. I want to get through as many as we possibly can. 2, 3. Okay, we should be good. So over here, Linda.
I've been with 3 people right at the end. And all 3 of the people waited till I went to the bathroom or at least was out of the room. Is that really something that is common?
It's very common, honestly. One of the things that we counsel families on all the time is be prepared. Your loved one may wait until you leave the room to exit this world. It is the most common thing that we see. Somebody is vigilant at the side of the bed 24/7 and has that one time where they're like, nobody's here, I've got to go, and then they pass. I believe wholeheartedly through my very soul that is purposeful, that they decided to leave when you weren't there because it was easier for them to go without you being present?
Yeah, I mean, it's just very common. So what I try to encourage people is I try to mention that at the beginning if I'm in the home or if I'm present, just saying, hey, that might happen. And also depending on the situation, if the person who is caretaking, if they come to a point where emotionally, sometimes giving permission is also helpful. It's like, hey, I see you. I love you. You can go whenever you're ready. And that's a thing that I often invite people to just have that conversation. Like, hey, good morning. I'm so glad to see you again today. I'm going to read to you. Just know you can go whenever you feel ready. I love you very much. I'll see you on the other side, or whatever sentiment works for you. And so, yeah, we're tricky that way.
Thank you. Just before we go to the next question, can I just remind everybody to complete their yellow evaluation form before you leave? We look at every last one of them and take your feedback. And if there's something we can do better, please put it on there. If you aren't happy with something or you think we can do something in a better way, please note it on there, because we go through everyone and that's how we keep improving the seminar series. So, yes.
This question is from Melissa. I like what she said, and I was thinking, do you provide individual counseling, perhaps for myself and my significant other, and talking about all of these things that you brought up? And what would that cost?
So I do work with people. I'd say, number one, you are never too young to start having this conversation. So I'm 43. I'm trying to talk to my younger friends and friends my age to say, like, have this conversation now. So I do work with people, and basically I just address whatever situation is in front of me. So I recently worked through we did 6 sessions over the course of 4 months, and it was really a mix of like coaching and project management. So she had done some amount of organization. They're a couple in their late 80s in Illinois, so we did it via Zoom. They were a total delight. And they had a lot of their paperwork done, but they hadn't had any of the emotional conversations. And so we went through sort of how they thought about death, what they wanted for each other. Their 2 sons were present, and it was like a family conversation. And we worked through, I sort of have a path, but it varies depending on what people have. And so they actually had 2 homes, and some of their paperwork was done, but they needed to finish and complete things. So I became also just like an accountability buddy to be like, okay, you were going to call the graveyard and you were going to call the funeral home. Did you do that? Is this organized? Did you find this piece of paper? So I do work with people in that way. And the cost varies. It just sort of depends on what people need. And again, because I believe that these services should be available to everyone, I really do try to work with everyone and find something that works for them and works for me. So I'm happy to talk to you more specifically after this, but honestly, I just want people to have the conversation, and I really just want to help. So
Melissa, are you unique? Are you the only death doula? Are there others in the community, other places we could go for help? If you're too busy, everyone calls you.
I say, like, there's so many resources in the community. There are other death doulas, but what I really want to say is that every death doula is different. So I have found that I seem to be a little bit more of a generalist. So I help people prepare and sort of do the emotional and social preparation for themselves. I have been present during and vigiling sort of in active death. And then I've done a lot of bereavement care and support for people who 1, 2+ years after the passing of a loved one, they're just like not moving on, and I end up helping. There are some people who only sit vigil. I have death doula colleagues who they just do artwork and legacy. So they'll take ashes and make sculptures. They will felt ashes into like a wall hanging, like a felted wall hanging. So every death doula is a little different. And we all have our specialties. There are some in the community, and I think that's, again, being clear, like, what do I need? In the Doula Co-op of Nevada, I'm on the board. We have a birth section and a death section, and we're working really hard right now to figure out a way for death doulas to be community health workers or advocates and actually be billable so that it's more accessible to people. So we're trying to do stuff on the policy side. But, I mean, hospices are a great resource. They will always take a conversation. I've never met a hospice that wasn't open to trying to help people to understand what the nature of their situation is and what they have. talking to your friends, I think some of people, it's always funny to me, the people who've done a ton of preparation are sometimes the people we least expect. So sometimes just offering the question at like a coffee or a breakfast, like, have you done any planning for the end, can be a really easy question to just see. And everyone might say no, but one person might be like, oh, I did this. And it just starts to help normalize it. Doing this together is a lot easier than trying to do this on our own. It's a lot harder to do this on our own.
So thank you. So you provide grief counselling. Hospice services provide grief counselling, AJ?
All hospice agencies provide grief counseling, and the grief counseling is available to any family that we've cared for, but it's also available to community. So we have community members that join. We have group grief groups, and then our counselors do individual counseling. Everybody's different on what their need is. Some people do very well in groups. It feels less intimidating to talk about your feelings when there's other people sharing. Other people are quite private, and the idea of being is terrifying. So all hospices provide it, whether it's an individual or group, and whether you've been on a hospice services or not. It's all available. Most of them post it on their websites.
Sandy, question over here. Nikki, do we have another question on this side?
How does one file a complaint against a hospice when the owner is non-responsive?
Oh, that like hurts my soul. It's dying a little bit. There are organizations. We all are governed by Medicare. So OIG is one of the reporting systems. You can find OIG on any computer website. You can just go look up OIG complaints. You can also make complaints through Medicare because they are federally governed. They do have to report as well. I do recommend sending letters. If you're unhappy with a hospice agency, I have to believe in my heart we all do this because we love what we do. I would want them the opportunity to try to fix it. I'm sorry to hear that. It breaks my heart. We're humans. We make mistakes, nurses, doctors, social workers, but we try. But there are reporting systems, and yes, you can find those online. I'm so sorry you had that experience.
Any other questions? We have time for like maybe one more question. Okay, good.
Good morning, and thank you for this fine presentation. My question is the following, and it involves a person dying who stipulates that they don't want a funeral or service of any kind. I have been in both situations. A friend died. His wife decided to have a service because she felt that his very full life needed to be celebrated. In the other situation, the husband adamantly did not want a service, and she held tight to his wishes, much to the static and frustration of a lot of family and friends. Is there a right answer to this?
Great question.
Is there a right answer? I think generally I hate the word right. Like I hate right and wrong because I just think the world is too gray. It's too nuanced. I think all of us can only go by our moral compass. So when I think about the person who said, I do not want a funeral, and then we have their spouse who feels like, how can we not mark this? I understand both sides. And I think there's a piece of me where, semantics, I'm like, okay, then don't do a funeral, but what are the ways that we mark this? Because this is where it does matter. Like, who is this for? He's gone. And when we don't take a moment to be present with the losses that we've experienced, when we don't have that sense of community, like we as Homo sapiens are meant to be in smaller groups, about 100 to 150 people, and we are meant to be connected to our people. And so when they pass, as far as I know, according to the law of thermodynamics, energy is neither created nor destroyed. And so there is something special there. And it makes complete sense that as humans, to metabolize the loss, to come to terms with it, and also move into our grief and bereavement period without so much pain and grasping, we do need to do something. So I don't think that she was wrong for doing something. This is where I'm like, well, we don't have to have a funeral, but I can certainly have a gathering at my home and process the loss of my husband in a different way. So I think it's nuance for me. I see two humans having two different needs, and that's the point of the work, which is how do we meet everybody's needs and respect everyone as best we can. That's how I view it.
Thank you. So if we don't have any more questions, I think we're completed for today. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here, and for Melissa and AJ for pouring into us and helping us with this really tough topic. So thank you. Wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you next month.